A futurist is someone who not only predicts the future, but someone who affects and shapes it as well. Isaac Asimov has certainly earned his nickname, the godfather of science fiction, which is why he is such an important futurist. Isaac Asimov is responsible for many modern film and novel science fiction stories. He has created fictional worlds and technologies, but most importantly, he has allowed children to explore science fiction and science without boundaries. Allowing young minds to imagine a world where anything is possible is perhaps the single most important thing a futurist can do. This is why Isaac Asimov is the most influential literary futurist in modern science fiction. Isaac Asimov was born in Petrovichi, Russia on January 2, 1920, and died April 6, 1992. He was a Russian-born American, and growing up he was first exposed to science fiction in pulp magazines. By the age of 11 he was writing his own stories, and within a few years he was selling them to the very same pulp magazines that had first caught his interest. Asimov was not just an author of science fiction. His interest in science drove him to become a biochemist. When he wasn't writing science fiction, he was a reluctant member of Mensa and author of popular science textbooks that aim to explain the scientific concepts to the masses, including his book, The Guide to Science. His desire to educate is what makes his work as a futurist so important. Asimov's exposure to science fiction came at a pivotal time in history. Having been born only a year after the First World War and finishing his education in the years prior to the Second, Asimov found himself in the middle of a technological boom. Aircraft, tanks, weapons, there was no limit to what man could do. This type of thinking is evident in his works. Asimov's most famous science fiction works were the Foundation and Robot series. In novels like these, Asimov commonly made up new words such as positronic, psychohistory, and robotics. Positronic was both a new word as well as a completely fictional technology. Asimov's imagination allowed the readers to expand their own mind, and the effects it had on others is immeasurable. Modern authors such as Michael Burstein and Greg Bear attribute their science fiction works to Asimov's motivation. Greg Bear has many science fiction novels, including the Forerunner trilogy based on the video game Halo. Alien technology far more advanced than humans is found, and Greg Bear explains humans longing to utilize and understand such amazing power. Michael Burstein, an award-winning sci-fi author, went as far as to personally thank Asimov for introducing him to the world of science fiction, in an article he submitted to Mimosa. Burstein's explanation of his encounters with Asimov, he describes after hearing the news of Asimov's death, he quickly remarked,
"As far as I was concerned, the world would never be the same."
Two legacies that Asimov believed would be his most influential were the Three Laws of Robotics and the Foundation series. He was correct. The Three Laws have become somewhat of a staple in the world of science fiction, as well as many concepts from his Foundation series, including the positronic brain and the concept of robotics. The modern-day U.S. robotics company coined the name from Asimov's I, Robot novel. The Three Laws have found themselves an everlasting place in modern science fiction. Will Smith's movie I, Robot is a trickle-down version of Asimov's book I, Robot. The Three Laws were central to the plot alongside the positronic brain which abided by the Three Laws. Of course, this is not the only example of Asimov's long-lasting effect on the world of science fiction. Asimov was a friend of Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry, which means Star Trek, one of the most iconic science fiction series of all times, borrowed from Asimov's works. Star Trek also borrowed Asimov's positronic brain in the series, as well as had him consult on Star Trek, the motion picture. This means that Trekkies can thank Isaac Asimov for the amazing series that is Star Trek. Star Trek is not alone in having used concepts borrowed from the Foundation series. In the series, Asimov created the planet Trantor, a completely urbanized planet with only one all-encompassing city. Many Star Wars and Foundation fans believe that Coruscant, a Star Wars planet, was designed in the image of Trantor. The planet was best described as urbanization taken to the max. Stepping out of the science fiction world, Asimov was right on track with space colonization. The space race began in the 1950s and the space shuttle was released in the 80s, and Asimov of course used this real-life technology to grab the reader's attention. Foundation was just ahead of these events, showing that why Asimov is a futurist. Today we face the very real possibility of colonizing Mars. It is easy to look at all the things Asimov affected and changed, but to understand truly how much he changed the world of science fiction, it is important to know who made it possible for him. Asimov credits John Campbell with this achievement. Campbell became an editor of Astounding Stories in 1937 and had a degree from MIT which Asimov believed made him very special. Prior to Campbell, writers had very little scientific knowledge in Asimov's mind. Campbell wanted realistic scientific stories and wanted scientific culture to be represented properly. Asimov credits Campbell with creating the science fiction world in which we live in today, which was stated in 1971. Imagine what Asimov would think of today's science fiction that credits him with so much. The magazine of fantasy and science fiction and Galaxy magazine appeared around the same time editing companies started to release sci-fi novels. Asimov believed that the two magazines represented reaction to Campbell's astounding stories. This was a proving ground for science fiction writers. In Asimov's mind, television was another big reason for the growth of sci-fi. Once again, Asimov and Star Trek collide. Asimov explains that,
in television too, there have been increasing examples of science fiction, of which the best, obviously, I say obviously because to me it is obvious, was Star Trek.
Of course, the irony is that Asimov had his own effect on the world of Star Trek. Cartoons have likewise taken turns with Asimov's work. Episodes titles such as I, Dobot and I, Roommate are plays on Asimov's I, Robot. The Simpsons used the 3 laws when Professor Frink creates a robot that abides by the 3 rules, and similarly, Futurama's Bender follows the same set of rules and uses the famous positronic brain. They say that imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, and even over 20 years after Asimov's death, the impact can be felt on the world of science fiction. Asimov's upbringing during the interwar period provided him with a unique opportunity to see technology advance at unimaginable speeds. His Imagine took care of the rest. Pulp magazines allowed Asimov somewhere to release his creativity. The legacy left behind by Isaac Asimov is no small one. The 3 laws of robotic and positronic brains have solidified their place in sci-fi history and in many films like Star Wars and Star Trek. These examples are why Isaac Asimov is the most influential figure in science fiction, which has an endless possibilities in the creation of tomorrow.